the game with pawn to d4. And Praggnanandhaa here thinking about what he would like to respond with. He's got two blacks in a row. In the first game, he was black against Arjun, and now once again has the black pieces. This tournament, we are witnessing more d4s than e4s. Pragg adjusts all his pieces there. Getting all the pawns in one line. Look at how he's adjusting everything. I think it's one of the things for these top players. Just do the ritual that you do. Feel at calm, feel at peace, and look at the time that Praggnanandhaa has spent for his first move. He's already taken 90 seconds, and he pushes his pawn to d5. Okay, Nordirbek now goes pawn to c4. We have the queen's gambit on the board. Pragg had taken d takes c4 against Arjun, but today he goes for queen's gambit declined with e6. And now knight comes out to f3. And Pragg brings his knight out to f6. Will Nordirbek go for the Catalan with pawn to g3? He goes knight to c3 here. And Pragg can go bishop e7. He can go bishop b4. He can also take the pawn here. He can go c6. It's one of the richest positions in chess. But you know, there are all these little moves like a6 and h6 as well. Pragg goes for the move h6. He takes on d5 here. And for white, I mean, the plan is pretty simple. Get your bishop out, play e3, play your bishop out. Yes, he plays bishop f4, e3, put the bishop out, castle, get your rook to c1. So in a way, it's easy. But black has found very concrete ways to fight these ideas. And black also says, like, I'll just take this. I'll put my pawn here. I'll go bishop f5. I'll castle. I'll go knight d7. Pawn comes up to e3. And now the bishop comes out to f5. Strong move, getting the bishop out. And now knight to h4. Nordirbek attacks the bishop here. And this is where he's trying to get that f5 square for himself. He can go bishop to d3, take here, queen takes, and then knight to f5. So he goes bishop d3. Black castles here. And he takes on h7. King takes h7 played. And then the knight can now look at the f5 square. But queen b3 first played by Nordirbek. He's pressurizing the b pawn. If you make a move like b6, the light squares do get a bit weakened. He goes knight d7, and clearly taking the pawn is bad because of rook b8. The queen is trapped. So he castles here. And Pragg, he knows that, you know, don't play your pawn to b6. He just plays rook b8. Well, in a way, Pragg just wants to go c6, maybe rook e8, put your knight here on e4, g6, h5. Seems like this is the idea that he has. a4 played by Nordirbek, trying to expand on the queen side. And Pragg goes pawn to c6. He starts controlling the square on b5 also here, and he's built a nice pawn chain in the position a5. Nordirbek trying to gain space, and Pragg goes g6. He's like, Nordirbek, if you go a6, I'm ready to play b6 or b5. g6 now takes control of the f5 square. The knight comes back. His job is done. He's looking now at the central square on e5. There's also knight a4 to knight c5 in the air. King comes to g7. And queen to a3. The queen can be traded here. But if you trade the queens, then I can take with the pawn, even double pawns to get the b file. But rook a3, and there's some pressure on the queen side. So he plays knight e8. And his point is, after take, the knights are really well placed. So a6 played here by Nordirbek. He pushes the pawn in, softens up the structure. And he goes pawn to b5. Pragg. Interesting. Now the c6 pawn has been weakened. The c5 square has been weakened. So it's a very committal decision by Pragg. But he's just saying to Nordirbek that, look, there are weaknesses. I agree. But on the other hand, I do believe that your a6 pawn can become weak. I can go rook b6. I can push my pawn to c5. So rook comes to c1. He is putting pressure on the c6 pawn. And now rook to c8. He defends the pawn on c6 here. And Nordirbek plays pawn to b3. The c4 square is now taken away from the black knight. And slowly knight e1, knight d3, knight b4. These are the plans. But Pragg is like, let's go. He goes pawn to b4. And he wants to get his rook up here. Knight to a4. Look at this. The c5 square is a gaping hole. The c6 pawn is weak. But this is modern chess. If you can't take advantage of the weakness, it is not a weakness. Knight to c5 no longer possible because I just take and then you will have to take back with the pawn. So he goes knight e1. He's coming here. Knight d3, knight c5. And pawn to c5. Pragg is like, let's get rid of that weakness. And if you're not careful, the pawn can come even one step ahead. Pawn to c4. And so Nordirbek now takes the pawn. Pawn takes pawn. And right now the position is roundabout even. Knight takes c5. Praggnanandhaa has assessed all the dangers pretty well. And he's gotten a fine position. Takes. You can take with either of the rooks here. He takes, rook takes c5. And now Nordirbek takes on c5. Rook takes c5. The rook is coming into c3. The b3 pawn is a bit weak. The back rank is an issue, yeah, for white. So needs to spend one more move, knight d3. And rook p5, I'm a bit surprised by this decision because I thought rook c3 is a plain kind of, but take, and maybe Pragg did not like this position. He would be pawned down. Get it. So he goes here, rook b5, f3 by Nordirbek. Takes e4 square away, ready to bring the king, back rank issue solved. Knight to c4 by Pragg. Whoa. Because if you take, he's ready with these two pawns. So very interesting move. Nordirbek is like, I'm not touching your knight, Pragg. King f2. What's your plan now? And I think Pragg should go knight a5 to attack b3. He does play it. Good move. Knight a5, rook b1 to defend this pawn. He goes rook to c1. Okay, let's take the pawn. Very, very sharp game suddenly. This is what happens in these games. It looks very dull and equal and so on. And all of a sudden, now it's a race. Takes on b3. Nordirbek must get in with his rook. He's attacking the c7, a7 pawn. The a pawn is running down. You need to move the knight. He goes d4. But why? Pragg makes a huge mistake. There's no time to waste. He had to get his knight out from here and start pushing b3. Maybe that was the point, or there was knight d2, which was the strongest, because here, now b3, rook b7 and rook a5 and take here. That's the point. Knight to c4 perhaps. Very tricky stuff. But he gave up the pawn and now Nordirbek could be winning. Knight to c5 played. He takes. Super complex right now. All that is happening. Rook takes c5. Takes the pawn on d4. Needs to get back the rook to b5. He goes rook c6. And now rook a8 played. A small error. He should have started first king e3, b3 and now g4. It's important to start gaining space on the king side because black wants to play h5. So rook a8, he goes king f6 and now suddenly black's position is okay because now g4, you can go rook b6. He goes king e3, b3 played by Pragg. And suddenly the position is equal. a7. And now Praggnanandhaa can go rook to c7. A very good move because the moment the rook moves, you can win the pawn. He finds it. And h4. He's trying to gain space here. Maybe h5 is not a bad idea. Yes, that's what Pragg does. Pawn to h5. this position is going to liquidate into an endgame where white will have an extra d pawn. Black will win this pawn, white will win this pawn, and that should be a draw. He goes rook b7. He's threatening b2, b1. So rook goes to b8, and now Pragg takes the pawn. And Nordirbek starts to think it's move 40. They get 30 extra minutes. He's thinking whether a check is needed or not. Takes here. And at this moment, Nordirbek it's a draw. And one of the reasons is that this pawn on h5 makes a lot of difference. Otherwise, g4 and white could have had a lot of space on the king's side. But now, with rook a2, you can attack this pawn. So he does play it. Rook a2, g3 is what Nordirbek has to play to save the pawn. He does it. And now for Pragg, maybe it's an important moment to get the king over here. King e7 or king e6. He goes rook to g2. And that is a big mistake. You know, it's moves like this that look very simple and straightforward often turn out to be mistakes, because now Nordirbek can play f4. And one can ask, what has changed? Well, the thing that has changed is that the black rook is no longer on a great square. And f4 anyway is a move that white wants to play. It's a very subtle error, but it's decisive and fatal. King e6 and now d5 check. He plays it, pawn to d5. And you don't want to go king e7 because then I have simple f5. You see how f4 helped. So king d6, check. King goes back to e7. And now f5. But f5, g3 is hanging. So first a check. That's a very important move. If king d6, I'll go king f3 and then pick up the pawn on f7. So goes king f6 and rook to b3. Very cool move, defending here, threatening to play d6 and king coming in. So he goes king e7, but now the control of f5 is gone and white can push f5, and Nordirbek would have made huge progress here. And he does it. Pawn to f5 played. Excellent move. Takes here. King takes on f5. And rook to d2. Attacking the pawn on d5 square. And maybe king g5 to take here. He goes rook e3 check. King drops back to f8. And I like this move that Nordirbek is planning. Rook e5. It defends everything. He's ready to defend here. And if rook d3 to attack this pawn, then simply come back king e4. f4. Defend it. But he goes rook d4. King f6. Excellent move here. Attacking the h5 pawn. Rook comes to d3. And now take here. So takes the pawn. Check by Pragg. And now king e5. Takes on g3. And now king d6. And you want to push the pawn forward. Yes, king d6 played. Rook goes to a3. And now rook e5. Cutting the king off. Threatening h5. Pawn comes up to f6. And he goes back. Rook to e1. Black plays the rook to h3. And king c6. Planning to push the pawn forward. Pragg takes the pawn, but the d pawn is just too strong. The systematic way in which Nordirbek has converted this is absolutely amazing. Rook c4 check. King comes to d5. Then I go d7. I have rook e8 check and d8 queen. There's just no stopping it. And look at Nordirbek there. He's looking in the distance. He's trying to calculate it through. And he knows the victory is in sight. Pragg is trying to think of a final trap or a trick that could help him. So he goes king d5. And now just d7. And Pragg resigns here. Nodirbek, Abdusattorov scores a win. And what was very interesting to see here after the game is Pragg analyzing it along with Nodirbek. And it was kind of a drawn endgame there with White having an extra pawn. But somehow it was very difficult for Pragg to hold it. And perhaps it was something that Nodirbek was played really, really well. Let's try to look at that rook endgame to understand it better a bit, and so that we can take home some of the learnings from this, because it was even tricky for